And we'll start the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for showing up tonight. We had talked about this for quite a while, getting all the commissions and committees together, the commission chairs, and with the city attorney and our new city manager to try to talk in regards to if there's any concerns. I think the attorney he's got a little program that he's going to present to us. But why don't we go around the table and just introduce ourselves for the new city manager here. I think we all know each other, but John is our new city manager here and kind of the new guy. And so why don't we start with Elaine? Why don't you go ahead and...
Elaine Barton, Planning Commission.
Tom Side, Arts and Culture.
Lloyd Grodchick, Park and Rec.
Amy Peterson, City Council.
Scott Dorsey, City Council.
Soren Maddox, City Attorney.
Terry Furlong, Mayor.
Tim Cole, City Council.
Lisa Long, City Council.
Archie Bickerman, EDA.
Okay, so everybody welcome. So I'm going to turn it over to city manager, and why don't we go ahead and hopefully get this done, wrapped up fairly soon. I don't think it's going to be a long meeting, but
No, I'd really like to make sure we finish absolutely no later than
10.
15 is my hope. I heard somebody's got a date at 6:15, so we gotta respect that. So the only thing I'm gonna ask is that you share what we talk about with your commission members, take some notes, and not everything will apply, but there will be some things where you hear it and think, yeah, my commission needs to hear that. I'm just gonna talk about staffing a little bit, pass it over to Soren. I think he might pass it back to me then at the end. I just wanted to,
Make a motion to adopt the agenda and everything, because there is a roll call and everything.
Why don't we just do that? It is published as a council meeting, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
So we called the meeting to order. If you could take roll call. Somebody take roll call?
yeah, I'll just do the roll call. City Council, Mayor Furlong,
Here.
Councilmember Thorson, Councilmember Peterson, Councilmember Wong,
Here.
and Councilmember Tim Cole.
Here.
The,
I need a motion to adopt the agenda
So moved.
by Councilmember Peterson,
Second.
second by Councilmember Cole. Any questions? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is adopted. We have one topic, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about staffing. I shared this with the city council at the retreat we had with them at the end of January. So I came from the city of Richfield. I was the community development director there. I believe that the city of Richfield has the exact same number of commissions as the city of North St. Paul. City of Richfield has 3 times the population and about 4 times the staff. And so we're staffing commissions at a much, leaner way with staffing. And so we have limited staff resources, attending your meetings, this. And people are stretched pretty thin between Lisa Ritchie and Jill Officer in particular attending a lot of meetings. So we're limited in terms of the staffing numbers. The other thing to keep in mind is that we can't really ask, so the employees I mentioned to you, their position at the city is administrative assistant and they're a certain pay grade. We can't ask them to do, Parks and Recreation director work and pay them administrative assistant pay. And so that's just something to keep in mind when you're interacting with staff that, to keep your expectations appropriate to kind of their staffing level. I'm in conversations with the city council about staffing. We had a workshop last week, and one of the things we discussed was adding a community development director or something along those lines. That would help with staffing, in particular the Planning Commission, and the EDA, and maybe to some extent the others as well. And we're going to be evaluating how we staff all of the commissions. So That's just a word on staffing, and I'm going to hand it over to Soren.
Perfect. So I'm going to cover kind of 4 topics. I did not prepare written materials, but if at the end of it, if you feel like, hey, I would like some of the written materials, I can provide those. For the council members, this is going to be, some of this is going to be repetitive from when we met about a month or 2 ago. But I think, I'll keep it high level and try and keep it moving. But, so the first item I'd like to touch on is open meeting law. And the council understands that they're subject to the open meeting law. We've gone over that. I think the planning commission is well aware that you're also subject to the open meeting law, as well as the EDA. Where there can sometimes be a gray areas on other committees, park, rec, art, are you subject to the open meeting law, or are you just a committee or a commission? And we used to hold that, look, as long as there aren't city council members on these committees or commissions, or at least not a majority or a quorum, we didn't think they were subject to the open meeting law. The state issued an opinion basically saying that any and all standing committees, so standing committee as opposed to ad hoc, which I would consider all of you standing, we form you at the beginning of the year. You're not just created one-off, and has some level of authority or discretion are subject to the open meeting law. And while I don't think most of you have spending authority, there are other authority. There's questions about, is the ability to make a recommendation authority. So we have erred on the side of saying your committee meetings are subject to the open meeting law. So what does that mean? That means that the public gets to attend your meetings, does not necessarily mean they get to participate. They get to participate basically however the agenda is set up. If you have an agenda that says public comment, then you need to honor that. But it does not necessarily mean that it's a free-for-all in terms of if you have a topic or an item on your agenda, you can recognize them, but you have no legal obligation to recognize them. The open meeting law is not a participatory, at least verbally, law. It is a you get to sit and observe law. You should be taking minutes of your meetings. Those minutes should be approved. And there should be an agenda, and we should be publishing that agenda ahead of the meeting. So as it relates to the open meeting law, I believe the safest route is to operate as if you are subject to it. There's absolutely no question about the council, EDA, and planning commission. Arts, there's potentially a question. I would encourage you to operate under it. I don't think that causes problems, but I don't know. I'll stand for any feedback on that. So with that, also keep in mind that what the open meeting law says is your decisions are made in the open in front of the public. So where I've seen committees get in trouble is, oh, we get it, public gets to come, we've published our meeting, but before the meeting, there's a lot of email chatter about topics that are on that meeting. Keep in mind that if you are subject to the open meeting law, it's the same thing as with the council, in that you should not be engaging a quorum of members to do decision-making before that meeting. I would encourage you, there's nothing that prohibits you from distributing emails with information, hey, take a look at it. I just would really encourage folks to not get too active with the reply button on those things, especially the reply all. I've said this in other trainings, if I could remove your reply all button from the computer, I would. It's the cause of a lot of problems. But to the extent and I know it's hard if you're only meeting once every 2 months or once a month, there's a lot of time in between. There's ideas that come up, you want to bounce them off. There's nothing wrong with sharing ideas with 1 or 2 members, but do not gain a consensus among the group. That's a potential open meeting law violation. I wasn't going to hit anything else on the open meeting law other than that. I don't know if there's other questions. The participatory, what does it mean when the citizens show up? I've touched on that. I don't know if there's questions or if that's a problem that we face, but that is something, sometimes committee meetings can get out of hand if we have residents that constantly kind of demand to be present or participate. They get to be there. The participation is not what's guaranteed.
In the past, say Parks and Rec, you're halfway through the meeting and somebody shows up.
Yep.
And the open part's already been done, they want to speak. In the past, I would allow them to
Yep.
talk, but is that the discretion of the chair? Or once they're past that, are they?
It's the discretion of the chair. You're running the meeting, it's up to the body. What you've just described is what I typically see. Someone walks in, they're late, they've made the effort, you want to recognize them, you're giving them 2 or 3 minutes. Generally speaking, candidly, if nothing else, practically speaking, it's a lot easier to take their comments after they've put in the effort than to shut them down and deal with the ramifications of that. So it's meant to be an open process to a point, so I've encouraged to do exactly what you said. But that's more practical advice than legal. You don't have to, but I would. Other questions on that point? Okay. Conflict of interest? Oh, sorry.
Not on that point specifically, sorry, but just questions about open meeting law. I think for the Arts and Culture Commission, we've been trying to follow and adhere very closely to open meeting law. But this is a very different group in that all of the work really happens in between the meetings.
Yep.
And so what we're looking at, and especially in light of not having staff support or not a lot of staff support, it's that team of individuals that's really going to have to drive all those projects forward. So we kind of look at ourselves as a group of project managers, really.
Yep.
So we're looking at, all of these ideas that we want to try and implement, we're trying to prioritize and select and then try and make progress. All of that progress has to happen in between meetings. There has to be a lot of, small decisions that are made in between meetings, or at least some decisions that have to be made. And, sometimes already I've had, people from the commission who just reach out to me and say, what do you think of this? Should we move forward? And I'm like, yeah, let's do that or whatever. So it's just 2 of us making coming to that conclusion to move something forward. But I wonder what advice you would have or guidance given a situation like that, where we're just really gonna have to have individuals who are picking up the ball and running with it in order to make these things happen.
I don't have any problem with that. One, I don't think that's a violation of the open meeting law. You haven't had a quorum assemble, and you haven't played and just so we're clear, even if it's a conversation between you and one other person, I forget how many people are on your committee. So if somebody talks to you and you give the okay, if they turn around and talk to another member and say, hey, talk to Tom, he said okay, what do you think? That is a violation. So we need to be conscious of that. But the one-off, I don't have a problem with, and you're right. You meet so infrequently, some decisions have to be made. Now, in my opinion, you use the phrase small decision. I don't want to be lawyerly on that, but realistically, those small decisions presumably are working to create some sort of work product that then holistically gets brought back to the whole to be decided on. So I don't mind that, and I think it's fully appropriate. As long as, again, mindful of the quorum sharing, but a bunch of individual work, one-off, 2 people, the whole product gets brought back to the commission for a holistic recommendation. I have no problem with that.
From a practical standpoint, maybe a thing to do at your meetings is, we're looking at the arts and crafts wagon. And so we're going to make a subcommittee of 2 people we're going to have those 2 people work on this for the next month, and then they'll report back to us next month.
Yeah, and that's what we have been doing. And that's a good example. Another example is, a mural on Love Ice Cream. So I have an idea for an artist that would work. I reach out to that artist. I reach out to Susanna. I bring those 2 together. I haven't talked to anybody in the commission yet. I
Right.
come back to the meeting and say, hey, I did this.
Right.
We still haven't approved anything.
No.
Nothing has gone forward, but at least I can make some decisions and make progress in between those meetings.
You'd get nothing done if you couldn't do that. Right.
We do that with our music in the park, because once we approve, we're having music in the park, we let Heather take and run with it, and she hires the people.
Perfect.
Just tell her, go hire who you think you want to do. Like John said, we have little subcommittees, as long as they're not quorums,
No.
they're just 1 or 2 or 3 people on each committee, and it seems to work really well.
So if those two people on the committee make a decision, they want to do something, that's great, just as long as neither of those two people call somebody else on the commission and say, hey, what do you think about this?
If I had 5 people in an email, I'd have a forum, so I can't be doing that.
Right. Well, how big is your committee?
9,
Right. So you get a little more flexibility than the 5.
but usually our subcommittees are 2 or 3.
Yeah. And I wouldn't go too much bigger.
No, that's what I figured.
And I'm going to remind Lisa and Jill, and we've never talked about this, when they email out to the whole group, to put everybody in the blind carbon copy. So then there is no option to reply all.
No, yeah.
Good idea.
I know you could do that.
Yeah.
Zoom. Half are on Zoom, half are at the meeting.
Yeah. So the bad news about Zoom is it was kind of a free-for-all during the height of the pandemic, I will say. Once we got through the end of August, what the state has ruled is there's really 2 situations in which you can use Zoom. One is, I'll call the vacation situation. So if Candy decides to go down to Alabama and do some golf, wants to participate in the meeting, she can do that, as long as she's in a public place. And this has driven me nuts, but it's the status of the way it works, is as long as she's in Alabama and, say, in a hotel lobby, and we've properly noticed it through Jenny, that's okay. And we have to be able to hear her, not necessarily see her, but hear her. And that is a acceptable way to participate remotely. What we were doing during the height of the pandemic is everyone was staying home, they were in their bedrooms, we were logging on via Zoom, for all the obvious reasons, to not spread, to not contaminate, all of that. The state has said that doesn't work anymore unless we, in essence, find that gathering doesn't work. So in essence, basically, the whole body would have to agree to appear remotely because of concerns of the pandemic. Some communities during February, during the spike, did do that, but what was happening is someone would come in and say, you know, look, I've either tested positive, or I think I've been exposed, I don't think it's responsible to come into the group, and the idea of, I'll just appear via Zoom, that is not available to us.
Do you need, so, for example, because we had a similar situation, I think it was like our January meeting.
Yep.
Where we inquired about, well, why don't we just do this on Zoom? We couldn't. If we wanted to, because everyone was concerned about the risk or something, so the whole group did not want to assemble, and we wanted to do that, do you need some special dispensation from the state, or what do you need?
Not from the state. If in fact, for the Art Commission, if you all wanted to appear via Zoom, and it's because of the pandemic, it can't be convenience, I would encourage us to take a look at adopting some findings saying, look, we're concerned about the pandemic, the spread because of it, and then we'd have to notice it accordingly. What stinks is we've lost the ability to have, because what the state has said is, we want you to appear in person. That's what we think is responsible government, open, transparent. We don't know the nefarious things you're doing when you're remote. What is counterintuitive is appear in person, but if you're sick, don't come in. And even though you're physically able to participate, but you just don't want to spread it. And that is not what's open to us. And you can't take advantage of the, well, just appear remotely and use the vacation exception because you have to be in a public place. Well, if you've been exposed or have test positive, you should not be going to a public place. So it is available, but not readily for the group. Individuals, vacation, as long as you give us enough time. Because if you don't notice, if it's just a call-in day of and say, I forgot I'm on vacation, you're not going to be participating.
Or you could participate, but you can't be
Well,
voting or
yeah, I mean, it
you'd
depends,
be a
right.
guest.
Yes, I mean, you can still watch. I think there's a question of, we've decided participation equals you can't vote. I mean, if you're sitting there at the dais talking and engaging, I mean, even though you don't vote, that isn't a right that the normal citizens would have. So if you can't be there in your capacity, do you get any more clearance than an average citizen? And so that's been my concern about I'll participate, talk, suggest, but not vote.
So how much notice would you want if a commission
Well, I think we're,
needed to do that?
well, it needs to be enough for Jenny to do like a special meeting. So if your meeting's on a Tuesday, she should probably have it by Friday.
Is that-
You mean for everybody?
Well, no. Are you talking about the vacation situation, or are you?
No, I'm talking about like
Oh.
an example that,
Well, that would take a little more time. I would need to understand look, this is because of the pandemic. There's a resolution that either the committee or the council would need to adopt. That would not be a next day thing.
right. Well, that's what I was thinking, because we're not under any
No.
emergency type,
There is no state of emergency
and
from
no
the
local
state
one.
and no local one.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
So,
Can we make decisions, or can we have discussion without a quorum at a meeting?
I wouldn't recommend it.
So do we cancel the meeting?
Should. I mean, if you don't have a quorum, you can't do any business. You're not taking minutes.
So if I come in and we don't have a quorum here, I just
You call the meeting.
call the meeting to order and then call the meeting.
No, I think you declare that there's not enough the thing is if you don't have a quorum, how do you even call the meeting to order? There's no votes to be taken. And that's come up before, should we sit here and talk about it? I think that's misleading, that you don't have the body has not assembled to make any decisions. Questions on open meeting?
Well, I actually have a question on, that was a good question, I thought. So, let's say some folks showed up because there was some topic
Yep.
that was going to be discussed, so they've all showed up and now we just don't have the meeting.
That's my recommendation. I mean, if you've got a 5-member body and only 2 of you are there, I mean, what are you going to be able to tell them? And I think that to the extent they're there and they think, well, we've been informed, no, they haven't.
Yeah, no, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to clarify that, because that could
It could. And
anger some folks. Let's
Right.
put it that way.
well, and the anger should be that, look, as a commission, you've committed, showing up in presence as part of that commitment.
I agree, I don't disagree with you
Yeah.
at all, I'm just,
Yep. And I know we want to be helpful. Now that you're here, let us talk to you. I guess if you want to go out into the hallway and have some conversations, maybe you can. But I wouldn't do an well, this isn't the meeting, but let's sit around and talk about it. I think that's misleading.
okay.
Oh, so you don't want us, so if we don't have the quorum.
You're
we don't
done.
Sit there and chit chat off the record.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
I think the example is, if you want to do that, you go to Newman's.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have a quorum, it's not a meeting, you have every right to go to Newman's and sit and talk all you want.
Because you can say, well, there's no quorum, but then, okay, well, then we're still gonna conduct a meeting. Someone can come in and say, well, you just had a meeting anyway.
I mean, I can't say that you're legally prohibited from sitting here and talking to them. If I was asked what's my opinion and advice, I'd say don't do it.
Legion, good place to go.
We'll name them all during the meeting. Next one's gonna be Roddy's.
Yeah, but Archie's here, so we're going to leave.
Where do you wanna go, Polar or what?
There's no meeting, it's done. We just say the meeting's canceled because we don't have a quorum, we're logging off. Yeah, and, yeah, I mean, look, it was properly noticed, we thought we were gonna have a quorum, we don't. As such, we're not able to conduct any business. There's no motion there's just you can't make a motion. You can't even call it to order.
I would say, though, if you know you're not going to, if, anybody on your commission knows that they're not going to be there, let the staff person know, and we can head off some problems.
And I
Right.
think that's what we've asked, especially on Park and Rec. If you're not gonna be there, please send an email letting the group know, or not, if you let, you and Jill, or maybe even just be Jill, know that you're not gonna be present, and then you'll kind of have a running tally. Of who's gonna be there, and if it looks light, can Jill either get on the phone and say, hey, is your conflict really a conflict, or she can't, okay.
Yeah, I imagine people are calling Jill up and saying, Jill, I'm in Florida, I can't make the meeting. Somebody says, well, Jill, I've got a doctor's appointment that might overlap, and so I probably won't be there. Then I think if Jill knows that one person's going to be the linchpin, she can call him back and say, is there any way you can, move things around? But she can't do that if she doesn't know.
She's been really good about it, and just for her safety, when she sends out the email, should she send it out singularly to each person, say, are you gonna be there, or are we gonna send it out, hey, everybody, the meeting's here, please respond just to me?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need to do a single email. You can do, if you think about back when people used to actually write letters, email's the same thing. It's just one letter to all of you. It's the reply that gets us in trouble. So if you're, please let me know if you're not going to be there. That's just a reply, not a reply all.
So make sure they just
Yeah.
reply all,
Not reply all.
or reply singular,
Right.
okay.
Yep.
And that's a good question too, and we probably might touch on it later, but to just circumvent that reply all and just single it, or just, everyone responding back individually, that's a serial meeting. It's the same thing, you're not accomplishing anything by just individually having a conversation, I email Lisa, and then I email Terry, and then I email Tim, we can't be doing that, and same with the commission members.
Won't you BCC? Fix that?
Well, to Commissioner Thorson's point, the BCC
Start.
will help on the sending it out.
Right.
That there won't be the ability to reply all if you do it that way. But yeah, if people are communicating individually, once they've individually communicated with a quorum, then it's a serial meeting.
I was just thinking about if you're not gonna be there, that you could
But
do
the rest
that
of
using the BCC.
the rest of the commission doesn't need to know that, right?
Yeah,
It's someone,
exactly.
it's staff sending out, tell me if you're not gonna be here. It's not tell the group. Now, when all of that is assembled, if staff assembles it and says, okay, these two people aren't gonna be here, and the email goes out from staff saying, look, it's gonna be these three folks, these two won't be there, I don't have a problem with that.
And in the end,
Yeah.
somebody's going to have to, like in the instance where Lisa sends out an email to everybody and says, are you going to be able to make the meeting? And everybody replies, reply all.
Yeah.
The only way that it's a problem is if somebody, comes in with a Data Practices Act request and says, oh, this is a problem because, and then it falls back to the issue at hand. And is it really a problem that people are talking about whether they're going to be attending or not? Probably not.
Just don't reply all.
Yeah.
Now, in December,
Yeah.
we had the storm, and Jill was concerned, she let me know, that she was concerned about a quorum. So Tim and I had talked, and we decided, no matter we just had a meeting, we don't have a quorum, we'll just cancel it.
Yep.
And I think that would work out best. As
Fine.
it was, we had a quorum. But we were concerned that we weren't gonna have a quorum because of the storm.
Yeah.
So just roll with it and do it.
There's so many little if this, then that. We know that the idea behind the open meeting law is to prevent behind-the-scenes communication. There's going to be coordination on storms, on do we have enough people. Play that straight up, work through staff, and we won't have any problems. Yep.
Okay.
All right. Conflict of interest. Candidly, this is an issue that comes up more for the city council. I haven't really seen it come up a lot with, say, an art commission. I suppose it could if Tom starts making sure that all of his various family members get the art contracts. But if you have, right. So the easiest conflict of interest is if Tom's on the art commission and says, we should start doing murals, and by the way, I've got a company that does mural painting, we would be the best. Can't do it. You cannot use your position for financial gain. And you can't do it through a straw person. Well, it's not my company, it's my wife's company. No, Tom, you can't do it that way either. Don't worry, it's just my kids. You cannot do anything to financially enhance yourself based on the position you hold. If you have a conflict, you need to declare it, in my opinion, as soon as you know about it. And at that point, because you have a conflict, it eliminates you from participation and the vote. The vote is the obvious one. But in my opinion, once you have a conflict, because you can't vote, again, that goes to the participation piece. You should not be participating. It doesn't prevent you as a member of the citizen from perhaps coming to the podium and speaking. You haven't lost your rights to do that. But it's deceptive to say, I can't vote on it, but I will still try and influence the council from a council seat or from a commission seat. My absolute advice on that, to play it straight up, is to remove yourself from the situation and declare that conflict immediately. That is not how it's always been done, but it is my advice as we sit here in 2022. What I will tell you is, I know of at this point 2 different situations where folks have been prosecuted for conflicts. It is something that both at a state and a federal level, they're starting to play a lot tighter and a lot more firm on. I would not play with it. And I'll tell you, my personal advice when it comes to conflict of interest is pretty conservative. I try and steer away from it because at the end of the day, what we are is we're all a governmental entity spending tax dollars, and there has to be a level of trust in terms of how that works. And if we start playing fast and loose, or it seems like they're self-dealing or picking favorites based on relationships, those conflicts can cause problems. And we have to steer away from that.
And on the issue of trust, I would say, you can nitpick about whether you have a conflict of interest or not. Even if there's the appearance of a conflict to the outside world, even if you say, well, it doesn't check all the boxes, we'd be better off if with somebody recusing themselves.
I think a good example of what you're talking about, Mr. Martin, if you don't mind, I'll use you as an example. It's a couple years ago when you were chairing the planning commission meeting, there was a subject that came up that dealt with your neighbor. Now, the meeting had several items, and when that item came up, you stated, I'm gonna recuse myself because, I don't even think you said because he's a neighbor, because then they come up and they state your address, but you said, I'm gonna recuse myself. You got up and you walked out of the room. Then the discussion took place, and then when it was over, you came back. So that's like, to me, the textbook example of how to handle it. And then other instance, recently, there's, someone on the EDA that states, I'm gonna recuse myself from voting, but they stay in the room and participate in the conversation. And that's where I think it can create issues with, not necessarily anything wrong, but just like violating the public trust. Like if this individual has to recuse themselves from voting, they're in the room, they're having conversations, they're giving their opinions, it could potentially influence decisions commission members make. So like in that instance, it's, if we're gonna talk about the thing that I have a potential conflict, and I don't even know, I think you can make an argument that he doesn't stand to make any financial gain from a transaction that could happen. It's just a relationship, but still, just to be, because we don't want to violate the trust of the public. Just, I got to recuse myself, and I'm not going to participate in the discussion. Steps out of the room, then comes back when it's over. That's, to me, the proper way to handle it.
And I think that is the gold standard. I don't think that you have to remove yourself from the room. You can. I don't think candidly you have to step away from the dais. You can. I do think you should turn off your microphone and not try and influence your fellow members. Because if you have a conflict, you do not have a participatory role on that item, pure and simple.
And show no reaction.
Well, not when you receive all those compliments, Elaine, yeah.
But that's more not giving the appearance
Yeah,
of a conflict to get at what you were saying, even if there isn't one.
right.
But there can be that impression, and that does tend to erode trust if it's an issue not everybody is going to agree on.
Well, and you really have to kind of work that through and say how it looks. If it looks questionable, and you're fighting back to say, well, no, but I don't have a conflict because I really want to participate, I mean, it almost becomes one of those, well, wait a minute. How does that work? I've never seen you so excited about an item. So, okay, I will move on from that unless there are other questions. Data Practice Act, you guys are subject to it. One of the things I would remind you about, again, going back to emails, don't forget that emails may be the subject of a data practice request. So be careful what you write in them as it
And-
relates
and-
to city business.
And nothing is ever deleted,
No,
ever.
yeah. Even if you think you've deleted it, you have not. And candidly, you have legal obligations to keep some of that data. So I just, my standard pointer is if the email you sent is suitable for the top page or top of the fold on a newspaper, to the extent we still have newspapers, feel free to write it. If not, I would think again before you press send.
Question on that, because when I first started on the planning commission, they were gonna have emails for us.
Yep.
All of a sudden, they don't have them anymore, so are we gonna be getting them?
I will look into that. I don't know the answer.
Am I mistakenly, and they were talking about,
No, I thought that, I think I still have mine,
because
but
they
they're,
pulled them back, they said they weren't gonna do it
yeah,
because of something.
with the new platform or
Yeah, the
something,
new
and I.
platform.
Okay, let me look into it.
So everything I send is on my own because I don't have
Then-
them.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that too, that, because it's my understanding that most commission members don't have a city email, they're just using their personal email. That's right. And during a data request.
Yeah, that gets hard.
So, I mean, I would advocate that, I don't know what the reasoning was, and I recall that as well, that not just the planning commission, but the parks and everyone was going to
Yeah.
have a city email, and I don't know if it can't be that. very
Is there an
expensive to set up.
extra cost for that, or do you know?
I think that's what we had discussed previously, that there was some cost implications, and
Okay.
then some commissioners didn't really use their email, so it was kind of like, do we do it? And I think Carrie would know.
Yeah, I'll look into it and see what we can find out.
Do you recommend that?
100%. Because ultimately, if the city gets a data practice request, if there's gamesmanship going by a commissioner, well, it's my personal email. I mean, let's be clear about something. It's not what the email address that governs the Data Practice Act, it's the content of the email. So we used to have to do the training, well, this is my personal phone, you don't get that. Yeah, you do. If it's a city email, it doesn't matter if it went to your work, it doesn't matter if it went to your personal account. So get in the habit of using your city email. Because ultimately, there's potential city liability if we don't turn over documents or try and hide them or destroy them.
You percent yourself, because right now I have my coordinated business email for my
Yep.
company.
Right.
So all of a sudden, my company would be in part of it then as well, correct?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, we've had that situation. I don't want to necessarily lay out all of the worst-case, scariest scenarios, but we had someone who's just like, I'm not doing 2 emails. Well, the data practice request came in, they blew it off, and the next thing you know, the subpoena came in, and they've got a computer forensic going in on their work email. It was not pleasing to this employer that their commission member was using the employer's email address because it violated their own policy there too. But now they're scouring the system, and that's not a system they wanted scoured. So keep them separate.
So what does the subpoena reach out to, just city
Yeah?
issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Can't reach any further than that?
they can't, but how do you know unless you read them?
Well, yeah.
So someone's going through.
Yeah.
What
Which
do
is
you
why
plan
it's
on
good
doing?
to have a city email
I've learned
address.
31 years if you know where.
There's a good example of Victoria.
Yeah, City of Victoria.
There's a city of Victoria that if you want to read up on that, like it was dealing with the council.
And that's the same thing.
Phones,
Yeah, text
and you
messages.
Clearly see, I'm texting Terry, then and so I went to the Minnesota Supreme Court, so.
Yep. If you did it, they'll find it if they get curious.
Well, plus, I mean, it happened not that long ago, I think one of the recent lawsuits regarding the 7th Street.
Mm-hmm.
All the planning commissioners got the email from staff, don't, let me know what you have on your own account if you have any emails, regarding this issue. So then you even have to spend time and go back and look, did I send anything regarding this even to staff. So it's just a pain when that happens.
It is.
So with that, do we mention it to our commission members to make sure they're all appropriate with having their own private emails?
Yep.
And it-
Yeah, I mean, I would, John said he'll look into emails. If that's made available to you via the city, I would take advantage of that day one.
So you suggest we do that, at our next meeting, just mention that as part of the agenda, and go, hey, who wants to follow your email, you said?
Well, John has to figure out the emails first.
And I think, like I said at the beginning, at your next commission meeting, I think an agenda item should be this retreat, and, oh, here's some things I learned at this retreat.
It's like an audit. We're doing an audit right now, so I think that's a huge thing. I didn't realize that you guys didn't have emails.
Well,
And I guess we never did in Park and Rec, so,
I think we might still have them technically, but I just haven't used it because everything's been coming from staff to my personal email.
I think that might have been one of the reasons that most people did want to deal with an additional email.
Well, that could be, I think it was, at first, it was difficult to use, that wasn't working quite right initially.
Like issues
But
with law.
by the same token, I'm kind of a believer in use it. That's your business, city business email.
And I know it's new ones, they didn't do it just because they were in the middle of trying to figure it out, and so I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
At the very least, hopefully we'll figure this out and get you city emails. At the very least, you could create a distinct email that's, John Stark, Planning Commission member @gmail.com. And so then there's no question that that's the address you're using.
And as a council member, my personal email is out there because when you campaign, you can't use a city email. And I still get people emailing my personal email. All I do is forward it to my city email, and then I respond to them on the city email. But I don't think that protects me from a data request, because if someone wants to say, well, here, look, here's his, Thorsten's conducting personal business through his email, fine, the attorney comes in to look through my personal email.
But that practice helps connect the dots.
Yeah, that's a good practice. The other thing I'd encourage you not to do, and I've tried to talk some folks out of, is, well, I want to give you all of my information. Here's my city email, here's my personal email, here's my work email. Just use the one. Get disciplined on that. Because if you give them all three or all two, whatever, you got the same problem. Data Practice Act, any other questions? You should basically assume that any and all documents you get are public. Very few of what you guys deal with. There might be some EDA documents that aren't, but Planning Commission, I can't think of anything that's going to be not public. Arts Commission, same thing. It's all going to be public. The last thing I have is just, I will say, is generalized advice. We presume Planning Commission's a little different. We have to have one. EDA, a little different. Don't have to have one, but there's strictly, there's a statutory rules and regulations that govern it. And then the other commissions, candidly, are a function of the city says, this is something we're interested in. We want people to look at it and give us advice. My first note on that is I would encourage you to remember you're basically advisory to the city council. They are free to take your advice. They're free to say thanks, but no thanks. Ultimately, that's how that goes from an advisory capacity. To the extent you see some planning commission or an EDA doing something different, when we've created these bodies, and I have not studied everyone's bylaws or everyone's operating rules, there are differences between these bodies. And by definition, the Planning Commission is going to have one set of rules. The EDA, because it's in a different statute, is going to have something different. I think I was working on the Arts Commission. They may have completely different rules than the Planning Commission. There's nothing that says all of these have to operate the same. You guys have different calls to duty. You may have different number of members, things of that nature. And there just may be, look, this is an Arts Commission. We're not going to function the same as an EDA. That would make sense to me. So to the extent we see, well, they do it differently, that's okay. And it's just a matter of following the rules that you've basically self-imposed on yourself. So I just encourage you to remember advisory, there will be and probably are some differences. That's good and that's okay. And that just, if you're on the planning commission or you're on the EDA, kind of stay in that lane, so to speak, and operate within the bumper rails of what you've been called to do there. There may at times be overlap, but candidly, the idea is to not have overlap. We don't need that redundancy. It's hard enough at times to pump stuff through government. We don't need a bunch of extra commissions on it. That is what I planned on covering, and then leaving time for questions.
Role of liaisons.
Yes.
We didn't cover that, right?
Yep. Well, I will now. Is that a suggestion? Liaisons. My starting point on liaisons is, especially for a council member liaison, is you are there to listen, to take the information back to the council. I think when a council member liaison gets overly involved in the commission, there is a perceived, higher authority because they're on the council. It can dominate the commission, and I feel like it takes away from the effectiveness of that commission being able to do their job, develop ideas. Now, if the bylaws, and I didn't study them before I came here, on the liaison position says, no, they're an active member, participatory voting, well, then ignore what I just said. But generally speaking, the very nature of a liaison is to sit, listen, and report accurately back to the council. It's not to dominate. It's not to sit and say, well, I don't think the council will ever do that. That's a bad idea. That isn't the role of the liaison.
So planning commission, I think,
That's the only one that can vote, right?
She votes.
Right?
Yep.
No,
no, no, she does not.
EDA, well, we're not liaisons.
Members.
No, the liaison isn't a voting member.
Right, with,
They
the-
That was
They
the
used
issue,
to,
was
yes.
we had a former
Yeah.
council member who was the liaison. I think the thing that got it all going was that he voted against a project at the planning commission, and then when it moved forward, he voted for it as a council member, so it created a lot of confusion, and I think that's when we kind of looked into it, and they changed that to say, no, liaison should be voting to avoid something like that.
right, but if you see Terry or Tim voting at the EDA, that's different.
Oh,
The EDA legally is not part of the city. It's its own entity, and they're voting members of that.
And their titles reflect that.
Yep.
Yep, I agree. And that's where there are differences between the bodies. Am I done now?
so I think it would be helpful, to go back to our commissions, if you have the handouts that you could provide, that'd be great. I mean, I don't want you to have to create something
I don't,
separate.
what I'm going to do is strip down the materials I sent the council, and I will send out the open meeting law, conflict of interest, and data practice materials.
Perfect.
So I had a few more things. Just after Soren got done saying, avoid overlap, each of you have a separate thing to do. There are a lot of things you do that overlap, and I'll just give a recent example. There's wayfinding signs, there's park signs, there's the sign ordinance. There are all these things related to signs that each commission is looking at a little differently. And I want to make sure we're always rowing in the same direction. We don't want the wayfinding signs to have one font on it and a different kind of snow. Oh, let's do the Olaf snowman. That looks more up to date. And then the park signs have the traditional North St. Paul snowman. So, and that's the job of staff that are at these meetings to say, whoa, wait a minute. Parks Commission, I know we're doing park signs, but there is this greater wayfinding sign plan, and let's take a step back and make sure we're all, like I said, rowing in the same direction. And so again, that's staff's job. There are a lot of us that are new, and so we don't always have the institutional knowledge that would be ideal, but just bear with us.
How soon are we looking at getting these signs into place? And the reason I ask is that it was brought up at the meeting last night.
Mhm.
And there's a grant with the person that brought it up. for a Rotary Park.
I was just gonna say, so Rotary Park is looking at
To
putting
know
a sign.
ASAP, and the discussion was decided with the commission members is we get back to them next month with what we've got based on what Jill researches.
Yep.
He needs to know by July, right, late June, early July at the latest, otherwise he loses his grant.
Yep. So again, I'd say I think there's a great deal of value in having our branding be consistent throughout the city, all that imagery. So I think that's a huge value to it. What I would hate to see is, the kind of the first sign dictates for everything forevermore. If it's a sign at Rotary Park, and it ends up being a little different than other signs, we could probably live with that if there were good reasons for it. We've got to spend this money, there's a grant. To the extent it's practical, let's make sure we're all together. We, as a staff, we just discussed this after the Parks and Recreation, after last night's meeting, and said, oh, wait a minute, there's this wayfinding plan that's got signage standards. Let's try to marry these things. And so we're hoping that we can keep moving quickly on this.
Okay, so continue it on the agenda for next month?
Yeah.
Okay.
So do all park signs, park designation signs, Casey Lake Park, that all falls under the wayfinding aspect?
I don't think it falls under wayfinding.
So, because this is Rotary Park, so
Yeah.
Rotary Park falls under a city park.
Yeah. I think that there's value in a consistent palette.
You got everybody's nodding their head in here on
Yeah.
that. But it's just, I think that council approved, based on the recommendations from Park and Rec, to move forward with replacing half of the signs in city parks and doing the other half in a year or 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the further it's gotten. There's been no color decision, no font decision, and Rotary Park kind of falls in my understanding is it falls under the city park kind of rules. So
Yeah.
where do we go? Who do we talk to? What?
I think that, like I said, this is an emerging topic that just kind of came to my attention today. I think that if we're talking about replacing half the park signs and we go forward with that, and I don't want to slow anything down, if we go forward with that, that's going to some extent, dictate what the wayfinding signs are going to look like. So something's going to come first. And so we have to know that if we start investing heavily in something like signs in one location, that's going to spill over into other things. And so to keep in mind that there are other commissions working on similar things, and the more we can communicate, the better, in appropriate open meeting law ways.
And it was our intention, once we get these signs to down to 2 or 3, that because it's such a visual thing, that we were gonna send it to city council anyways, and say, hey, this is what we wanna do in Rotary Park, you okay with this?
Yeah.
One thing that happened last year was the Design and Review Commission was absorbed by the
Right.
Planning Commission. And so I'm trying to understand what the process is there. And then as council, we've also directed Arts and Council to take on banners for the 135. So I think there's definitely some clarity that would help me
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put roadblocks. I'm just saying, it's in all of our best interest to have as much standardization in these kinds of things as we can.
Just like understanding the process. Does it go to planning and then to council? Say the park signs? Or what is the process?
My ideal process would be on the front end to have some agreement on what the standards are. And then once the standards are established, everybody can just charge forward on their own. And I haven't looked enough at the wayfinding plan to know if that establishes those standards or not.
Elaine says no.
Because you're talking only about Rotary. I do know there was also a Rotary Park master plan, and that had a science section in it. So that's another little wrinkle just specific to Rotary. That I remember that.
I had mentioned to Jill, and maybe we just need to sit down,
Yep.
three of us, to set up a meeting or something, figure out how we're gonna move forward with this.
Yeah. And we can bring Lisa in too, because she's got some involvement, so we can do that. And, you know, and I'm sensitive to the fact that I think between the pandemic and changeover in the city manager position, there were a lot of things that were just put on hold and are just bursting to happen, and I don't want to hold back any of that energy.
And they've been very understanding, working with us very well, and very patient with the whole sign thing.
But the grant's a big deal for them.
But the grant's a big deal for them.
Because that's the funding.
Another question that's come up to me is about spending. Like, well, you know, what can the Arts and Culture Commission spend money on? And I would say generally, keep a couple of things in mind. Anything over $25,000 has got to be considered at the city council. Anything under $25,000 is, well, let me rephrase it.
$24,990.
So anything,
We're gonna build Northwood, we're gonna build that building at Northwood in pieces.
we're not done yet. Well, the pieces doesn't work. This is cumulative spending. Anything under $10,000, well, let me rephrase it. Anything under $25,000 can be approved at the staff level with some conditions. Has to be in the budget. And so if the Arts and Culture Commission came to us and said, well, we want to spend, you know, $3,000 renovating the arts and crafts wagon. If there's somewhere that fits in the budget, and a staff person can say, yeah, that makes sense, staff can approve things under $25,000. Within staff, anything between 10 and 25,000 is me. Anything under 10,000 is a department director. This is probably more than you need to know, but.
No, we need this last night, yes.
So that's just some general guidance. You should work with your staff liaison on seeing what your budget looks like. You know, if you don't know what your budget looks like for your commission, Arts and Culture might not have one. I'm not sure.
They do.
They do. I couldn't remember when it was created in relation to the budget. But if you don't know what that budget looks like, ask the staff liaison. They'll work with me. They'll bring a copy of your budget to the next meeting, and you can talk about it as an agenda item, just a review of the budget.
We've even
Oh, Arts
offered
has
to
one?
share with Tom,
Arts has one.
Oh, okay.
right, Tom?
Yeah, how would that work in terms of just, like, again, like we have people who are like project managers to make things happen. So if we have the art cart, I think that's the working name now of the craft wagon. And we need to get supplies for that because we're gonna have the art cart down at the car show so that kids can make a thing. Those resources that would be needed, could someone from the commission go and buy those and be reimbursed by the city, or how would we need to make that work?
It would be best for city staff to purchase the things. I mean, we could look into it.
You can do reimbursement, but it assumes there's authorization received before the purchase occurs.
I think for Park and Rec, when we had positions, those positions made all the purchases.
We're what?
Those positions made the purchases.
So
Like
Deborah
Splash.
would go out. And
Correct, Deborah,
Keith would go out and buy it.
out. You know, if we needed to do a project,
Oh,
we'd make a
it's the
list,
staff.
and they would,
It's
staff would
staff.
go out and buy it.
Yeah, it made it much simpler,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
So can
believe
donations
so.
be made to the Arts Commission?
What's that?
Can donations be made to the Arts Commission?
We're
I mean,
already
it's set up for
on-
that? Okay.
On the website, yeah.
But the donations have to be accepted through the city council.
Sure.
Yeah. So you say, I want to donate $100 to the art commission, it still gets routed through the city.
Yeah.
The city statutorily has to accept the donation. It's been earmarked, so it goes to the art commission's
Right.
budget. So it's not The lawyer, it's not to the art commission, it's to the city with the designation.
Right.
But it's probably consent agenda type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not debated.
And you can designate too if you wanted to, like for the
Absolutely.
art cart or
Most
whatever.
people do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of donations of the fire department, the police department.
But everything's funneling through you anyways, right, John?
Yeah,
When we say we want to spend $4,000 on whatever, it's through Tim, okay.
No, I was waving. I have nothing to, my hand's back down. I'm not volunteering for anything. Sorry.
So basically, whatever we recommend,
So the reason you showed up.
you recommend.
I could spend money.
Whether it's gotta go to city council or not,
correct.
okay,
I mean, eventually a invoice is going to come across my desk.
better, right?
Because along those lines, that was kind of where I was looking for clarity as well. Southwood is a perfect example. They present every year, and they spend $6,000 every year that the park funds, whether it's new mulch, whether it's spraying for invasive weeds, whether it's whatever. And I believe we've always brought that in front of council for approval, just to keep everyone in the loop. But now, what I'm understanding is staff can approve based on it's under a financial threshold
And in the budget.
and in the budget, which it's in there every year.
Yep.
Is staff me or is staff Jill? Because it's not to the level of yours,
Staff is full-time
so it's Jill.
Jill.
Okay.
And Jill doesn't have the authority either.
Okay, so that's,
I mean, for spending the only,
Can I make a suggestion that we connect back with the Southwood director and make her aware of how this process is supposed to move forward in the future?
sure.
Because I think there may be some confusion as to, you got the money, then they go out and they just spend it and get some money and get the reimbursements, but you might want to do some education.
and she hasn't been asking for reimbursement unless that's just something very recent. She's had Public Works go make the purchases on her
Perfect.
behalf.
Perfect. I
And
just
then they're
wondered.
submitting it. Where the issue came was, once the receipts were submitted, did they track back to the proper point in the budget?
Perfect.
Yeah. So again, though, anything over $25,000, no question, goes through the council, has to get pre-approved by the council, not approved after the fact, pre-approved. Anything under $25,000 has got to be me or a department director, and it has to be in the budget. If somebody came through and it was $20,000 and I looked at the budget and I said, I'm not seeing it, then really what we have to do is go to the city council and say, we'd like you to amend the budget to allow for this expenditure.
So she can only spend up to what we approve as a Park and Rec Commission?
With pre-authorization. Just, so for example, on the spending item, if you budget $10,000 for paint,
Yes.
it's in the budget, and it's crystal clear. Technically, if she is not the staff person, she's still, the staff person has to go out and make that purchase or decide that we can go do it. She can say, we're ready to paint, the boards are here, I'd like to go buy the paint and the brushes, contact whoever has the authority to spend the money and say, we'd like to go do this. Yep, it's in the budget, we're on budget, everything's okay, go do it. Does not mean that she gets to go out and do it, swipe the card and hand the city a receipt. There always needs to be some level of communication before that expense occurs.
So she used to come in with a $6,000 budget. It was wood chips, it was,
Shovels,
Thorn
it
removal.
was,
she had a list.
Yes,
Of
she's
things.
done really
And
good.
as long as she was within that $6,000,
That was. But it's still, from my position, it's all budgeted, she's got her list. Don't show up with a receipt, show up with the list and say,
Yes.
I want to go buy this. Yes, no problem.
yes.
So if she wanted more from the Park Commission, she'd have to come to us and do the city council. Okay.
It doesn't have to be that complicated, though. She could email Jill, email me, say, here's the stuff, could you purchase it?
No, over and above the 6,000, for example. She wanted to go over and above the 6,000,
And it's not in the budget, then,
then it wouldn't be considered in the budget then, correct?
right.
Okay, got it.
Question. So, art stuff is real different. So first of all, I mean, we have a budget, but not enough to fund hardly anything. And art costs a lot of money. But generally speaking, we're expecting that it's not gonna come from the city, the funding to paying for things. A lot of the money that's available out there, they will not give it to government entities, but they will give it to artists. So what I need is a little bit of guidance on, so I'll give you an example here. So we have an artist who is very interested in doing a mural for Susanna at Love Ice Cream. So what we want to do with this artist is get a request for proposal, what would it cost? And then we help find the funding that would pay the artist to do the mural. So the city is almost not involved, aside from approving what's painted on the side of the building, as long as that fits within the design and review, I guess.
I don't have a problem with that.
And then the Arts Commission just coordinating the activity.
Yeah, so I mean, what I hear you saying is you kind of have someone you want to do it, you kind of have an idea of what they're going to paint, or maybe you don't, I don't know. And it's, make it up, but it's, $2,000 to do it. And you know that roughly you need, making up numbers, $1,000 a paint and $1,000 for their time. If you have people you contact and say, look, we want to do this mural, our budget allotment for this is $0, we need $2,000. We'd ask that you not necessarily route the money through the city, but maybe you want to buy the supplies or give the artist the money for the supplies. I don't have a problem with that. Because that's not going to show up on any audit trail whatsoever.
Right, I mean, because basically, it could be more in the neighborhood of like $20,000.
Right.
Or say if there's something that's more than $25,000, it's still irrelevant to this spending, because it's not coming from the city, right? So as long as so we're coordinating external nonprofit organizations that make grants to this type of thing. And so we're just coordinating that exchange of money between that entity and an artist, not the city.
Would there be a time that a grant would go into? Can you apply for grants?
I think there may be some, but, just from, this is some of the early conversations that we've had with some of these different places. It's like, they don't give the money to the city government. So even the places that have the legacy funds, so they're not doling out money to arts commissions at cities.
Even if it's earmarked, Tom?
I don't know. So if it's earmarked, so like if we had some development.
I will donate, like your,
Yeah.
I don't know who the gifting folks are, but if they say, look, I'm willing to give, I don't trust government, but I want this art to be done. Would they be willing to donate $5,000 to North St. Paul upon the condition that it be used for the mural?
I don't
Because
know.
once that condition comes in, we're handcuffed. It can only be used for that.
Maybe, yeah.
The only concern I have with the scenario you've drawn out, where city property, city done, we encourage, and then money flows to the person. In a normal world, you would engage this artist and say, in exchange for $2,000, you'll give us a mural. Here, we don't necessarily have that contract, because what we're saying is, you're going to paint us a mural. Good luck, we may help you get some funds, And so it's easier if we control the funds. Now, if we don't, we don't. But as it develops, it might be good to just check in on how that process is
Yeah,
working.
I think so, because the way I see it is we're really acting as coordinators,
Right.
liaisons between these different entities. So we're in between three entities, for example.
Okay.
The artist, the location,
Yep.
and then the funder.
Well, you're facilitating relationships.
Yep.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, I look at our Arts Commission and say, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Because
Oh, yeah.
unless there is, if we get so say somebody from the city, or another thing I want to talk about was trying to get some dollars earmarked from development, so we have, to start to get that pipeline going. So any new development has to put some percentage toward the arts, which would be great, because then that's for city property and things like that, right? So, Because this, like the mural thing is a private property. Instance.
We'd have to talk about the authority to charge that back to the developer, but.
Doesn't that, other cities do that though already?
Well, there's a park dedication fund.
Yeah, like the park.
But there's, I think it's guided by state statute that allows you to do that.
My understanding is if there was a development that was coming in on their own dollar, doing things, maybe not. If there's a development coming in saying, we want tax increment financing, that the EDA could say, one of our rules is if you get tax increment financing, we're expecting you to do some public art on your site. If you can't do it on your site, we're expecting you to donate to do it elsewhere in the community as a condition of getting this money that's not a entitlement.
Yeah, the fee that everyone's familiar with is park dedication. There's a specific statutory provision for that. And that says, when you do a development, cities can charge park dedication. Where cities have gotten in trouble with that, Woodbury, Egan, is they've said, well, we want a street access fee, and here's our formula. What the court has said is, you can't charge that. Show me the statute where it says street access fee. And they can't. They just say, well, it just makes sense because it's going to, there's going to be more traffic, so we want to start recouping those dollars. And the court has said, unless it's explicitly listed in the statute, you can't make up a fee. And so along the idea with the art stuff, if you just want to tag it on as part of the development, the concern I would have is, I know of no statutory provision that says, city, you can charge an art fee. So you can't just tag it on. But in the quid pro quo of tax increment financing, different deal.
So there is PUDs too, would that fall under?
There's a statute for parks stuff.
For park dedication there is, but the park dedication limits on what we can spend it on.
So then that would fall back on the EDA if there was a project that asked for TIF funding. The EDA could tag that on.
Yes,
That-
but
and then it falls within the guidelines?
That's the argument, yes.
Okay.
I mean, you still don't have statutory authority, but because you are giving them money, the way the law is written is, there's a quid pro quo.
Okay.
So this doesn't look like a good potential pipeline for us.
It-
Because I'd rather not have more TIF.
Fundraising
Right?
is probably the best
That's
option.
fundraising.
Yeah.
And I was just gonna say too, what you're talking about, just the city acting as an intermediary, because I'd imagine that that's set up that way where they want to avoid council approving an art project because art is so subjective, and that potentially 3 votes could shut down something that the building owner wants, the arts commission wants, the artist is willing to do it, but because it exceeds that threshold, now it's gotta go to the council, and now I'm saying, well, can you put a walleye in there or something?
Yeah,
Or
yep.
like-
This will be the third time I've said this today. A camel is a horse that was designed by a committee.
So
Tom, are
who's
you
it-
going to be
who-
doing art on private structures or just city structures, or is it all, is wide open?
Both. Yeah, so like, as we think about murals, for example, that would be, or it'd be public or private, I suppose.
Where's the park dedication money? Whose fund is that in?
Cities.
Everything's
It's
the
a,
city.
it's a
Right.
specific earmarked fund that the
Right.
city collects. There's limits on what you can use it for. For example, you can't use it on routine maintenance. Used to be that you could only use it for land acquisition, broadened a bit, but you can use it for some of the other infrastructure. But it is a city council controlled money.
So EDA or Park Commission or
No,
could
it's
make
city.
this,
You can make a recommendation,
any of those commissions could?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as
I'll
long.
fill them in on that, because it was the understanding that it was all in the Park Commission funding. Okay. As opposed to the park
The
fund.
park commission can make the recommendation,
Yeah.
the council still has to
Right.
approve it, and it has to fall
So I
within,
think what you're saying is
within the
that other
guidelines.
commissions could make recommendations to take money out of that,
Out of,
out of the.
Oh.
out of the park dedication, they could, whereas with the park fund, we're the ones that get to make the recommendation, but the park dedication money, any commission could make a recommendation.
I mean, if that's one of the things you're asked to do, I suppose. I don't know if the city council's looking to have recommendations recommendations on spending park dedication money.
Right. I think the recommendation would come out of the park, or the park commission, for both of those funds.
Right, yeah.
Just quick question aside from the cost, but Arts Commission, again, I mean, we serve at the pleasure of the city council, so I mean, anything that would be installed on city property is still gonna have to be approved by the council, is that correct?
I think so. I mean, I guess unless the authority's been granted before that. I mean, John, as the manager, has the ability to control any and all staffing issues. I think that, depending where we go with the murals, I would encourage the council to at least discuss what they're willing to delegate, because we've had murals go sideways quick.
Yeah, I mean, an easy example is, we wanna do a mural on the side of the Public Works building. And the Arts Commission has a little idea, and we have to do the thing, and we find funding for it. And then, boom, it's done, and the council didn't even know. That'd go well. Yeah, I mean, it's, because I think that's there's a concern among some members on the Arts Commission that there would be time and effort put into coming up with an idea or some kind of art installation on public property somewhere, city property somewhere, presented to the council and it gets shot down. And I suppose that's just a reality that.
It is, it's back to the advisory nature of the committee. So, I mean, there's, and depending on how you want to manage meetings, and I don't think anyone's looking to have city council meetings go longer, but, it's the whole thing. If you don't want to wait till the end to get an idea shot down, present it a little sooner and see what's going on.
One of the things I've talked to our electric utilities director about, I don't know if it's realistic, is wraps, like shrink wraps on utility boxes. That's the kind of thing where I think, a representative from the Parks and Recreation Committee could come to the city council. The city council could say, yes, we're going to approve $10,000 of doing these wraps. And they could say, and we're going to delegate the authority to design, to accept the design to the parks. You don't have to come back to us. So they could say that. Or we're going to delegate it to staff or whatever, that they don't have to be involved in all those
You're saying
decisions.
the rec would do that, or the Arts Council?
Arts, sorry. Yeah, I misspoke. So the last thing on my agenda is, that I wanted to mention is just, watch what you say. And I'm going to give a specific example. And if it was any of you in this room, don't feel bad. I don't remember who did it. So
That's proud of me.
there was a commission meeting at which a couple of commissioners were talking. I think the mics were hot about, I heard Old Republic Bank is going to close down, that branch is going to close down. That got around the community. We called the branch manager. They said, no, we're going to be expanding. We're really excited. So watch what you say with gossip or, that's a hot mic. And people put a lot of value in you. And if you say something, it holds greater weight than if, just the average person says it. So just remember that. That's all I have.
So this meeting was great. I mean, I think it served a purpose. Is there anything else from any of you that, since we have everyone here, Elaine, questions, or John? This is the time to do it. If you got anything that you really want to.
Thank you to Jill and Lisa from the Park Commission standpoint. Very well done. They've been,
And I work for all of you, so call me if there's questions.
and thank you for meeting last week. That was very helpful.
I will always meet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was very helpful.
I haven't gotten my first paycheck yet, is that?
Oh, you get 100% every year.
Oh.
I get 100% increase every year.
Did they stop giving you the council check? Did they keep getting it?
Fix the glitch.
All right, if there's nothing else, motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilmember Peterson, second by Councilmember Thorson. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. It was really good.
Thanks.